So, as already explained several times by Professor James Bain, Marco Teresa, also Mr. Wingji, in the course of Chinese history, the way tea leaves were processed and the way tea leaves were then used in order to prepare the beverage changed dramatically in the course of time. Normally, the common narrative, as we have already heard, of the history of Chinese tea spots three different phases of the evolution of the preparation method that are depicted as the standard methods in three different periods of Chinese history. The first one, as we know already, is the one of boiled tea, 煮茶, of the Tang Dynasty, which corresponds to the preparation prescribed by Livio in his Classic of Tea. Tea was powdered tea again, or the tea already broken in small parts that was boiled inside in a big cauldron, and then the decoction was scooped into balls with a big spoon. The second phase is the one of the so-called whisked tea, that consists in mixing hot water and very fine ground tea powder directly in a bowl with special bamboo whisk, which was the standard method of the Song Dynasty. This is also, of course, the system that was then exported to Japan by monk Eisai at the end of the 12th century, and which eventually became the so-called Japanese tea ceremony. The third phase is that of steeped tea, or pao cha, which consists in infusing the whole tea leaves in hot water, generally in a dedicated pitcher that now we call a teapot. In this way, we don't have a mix of water and tea powder, but we have only the liquor extraction from the tea leaves. This method became common, of course, during the Ming Dynasty. Nevertheless, this kind of simple thread timeline evolution of the brewing system of tea, which is presented in many books and also in many tea culture museums. These ones are from the Hong Kong Teaware Museum. Is clearly too simplistic, since in different times we know that different kind of preparation coexisted, and was already Professor Teresa said already in the Charging by Louis speaks about different ways to prepare tea, which he briskly dismissed as wastewater from the sewers. So today we know that in China the most common and the most appreciated way to preparing tea consists in steeping tea leaves in small teapots, making multiple consecutive infusions with the same amount of leaves, in the same way we had tea today actually. So every time you have to empty completely the pot and pour the liquor in small cups, from which tea is then sipped without adding anything. So inside the tea. This method evolved in Fujian and Guangdong provinces, probably already in the late Ming Dynasty, most probably in the early Qing Dynasty, and is now known with the term Kung Fu Cha. The same procedure of multiple steeping was introduced to Japan during the 18th century, which gave birth to the tradition of the sencha tea ceremony. Today, I would like to present some visual and textual materials from the Ming Dynasty related to the different ways of preparing tea in use in the course of the Ming. So first, we know that as Professor Wingji already told us, in the first emperor of the Ming Dynasty, Hongwu, or Zhu Yuanzhang, in 1391, stopped the production of compressed tea cakes. And so from that time, Ming court and also common people used only, let's say, uncompressed loose-leaf green tea. This form of tea actually was already in use in the Song and Yuan dynasties in Buddhist monasteries and among commoners, along with other forms of compressed tea. Independently from its form, in Song time, tea was normally prepared in this way. Tea was ground using a special stone mill and then sieved in order to obtain a very fine powder. The powder was then put in a bowl, and water was poured onto the tea from a pitcher with a very thin spout. So this procedure was called pointing tea, 点茶 in Chinese, because the water was pointing at the middle of the cup with tea inside. So the mix of tea and powder was then vigorously stirred using a special bamboo whisk. And in this painting we can see, this is from attributed to Liu Songnian, we can see the mill here in the lower part of the painting, and we can see on the table the bamboo whisk. Here. So this is the bamboo. This is the mill. This is the bamboo whisk, and these are some cups upside down and very well orderly piled cup saucers. And this servant is pouring tea from this pitcher. This kind of preparation is the one of the Song Dynasty, and tea was then whisked with this tea, with this special whisk. So this is the whisk from another book from the Song Dynasty that was then printed in the Ming, and we can see again this kind of whisk with straight whiskers and some carving as decoration in the handle. This we can see a modern version of chaxian, or chasen in Japanese. And here we can see the black glazed bowl with lacquered wood saucer, typical of Song Dynasty. The movement of stirring of the tea powder and the water produce a very thick froth on the surface of tea. In the Song Dynasty, it became very popular, making special contests for the preparation of tea. So people made tea, and they were confronted with different kind of tea. And the principle was that the brighter the froth, the longer it took to dissolve and reveal the liquid beneath, the better was considered the tea. And here we can see a new version of this kind of toucha, or tea contest made with powdered tea. So these kind of preparation remain the standard in elite tea consumption during the Yuan dynasty and also the first part of the Ming Dynasty. So the first known manual on tea written in the Ming epoch is the Chapu, or tea manual, composed in 1440 by Zhu Quan, that was the 17th son of the founder of the dynasty. This text deals exclusively with the preparation of whisked tea powder and describes in detail the grinder, the mills, the sieve, the whisk, and the spoons, all the necessary for this kind of preparation. In the section about pointing tea, after explaining how to heat the bowl, how to pour water and whisk tea, it also mentioned the fact that in that time there were people steeping fruit and flowers to make beverages used as substitutes of tea. It does not state clearly if tea was also mixed with fruit and flowers, but in another section the text gives also instruction on how to prepare flower-scented tea or tea scented with Borneo camphor. From this we can see that in the middle of the 15th century, tea was still normally prepared in the Sung style, which means powdered whisked tea. Also, the use of Borneo camphor was a typical custom of the Song Dynasty, even if strongly criticized by many Song tea experts. In the 100 years following the composition of Chapu, we don't find any new treatise dedicated to tea, but we have many paintings representing tea preparation and consumption, in particular by Suzhou painter of the Wu school, and also some related material artifacts, in particular teapots, as already Mr. Ip told us. This is a painting by the famous painter, Suzhou painter Tang Yin. It is entitled The Bamboo Tea Stove, and it is conserved at the Oriental Gallery of the University of Chicago. And on the right, we can see a servant boiling tea in a kettle over the stove. We can see also a white ceramic teapot on the couch beside the scholar, and two main characters that are drinking tea from two white tea bowls. I think that this painting, since we have here it is the tea stove, here we have the teapot, we have the cups. Since we have both tea kettle and the teapot, it's quite clear that this painting is portraying the preparation and consumption of steeped tea that was prepared infusing tea leaves inside the white teapot using the water heated on the stove. Also in this painting by another Suzhou scholar painter, Wen Zhengming, dated 1531, we see a similar situation. A servant is boiling tea on a kettle on the stove, and two scholars are drinking tea, and there is a big round teapot on the table and two cups. Observe that the two cups don't have any saucer. In great part of late Ming Dynasty painting portraying tea, we find similar settings. In this period, as already seen, we also have first samples of a teapot made with Ising clay. Mr. Ip already talked about this teapot that was excavated in 1966 and is now at the Nanjing Museum. So from the visual evidences, we can affirm that at the beginning of 16th century, in the area of lower Yangtze River, tea was already prepared, steeping tea leaves in a teapot. Nevertheless, and this is why I'm here today, in this period we also have possible visual evidences and quite strong textual proofs of the use of other form of preparation. I will start from this painting that is an undated painting attributed to Tang Yin, sold at an auction in Beijing in 2006, probably from the late 15th or early 16th century. The photo of the painting is not very clear, but it portrays a scholar reading and playing the qin, the instrument, while a servant on the right is boiling water on the stove. On the ground, beside the table, in this area, there is an object, this one, that I would say is very, very similar to the kind of tea mill used in the Song Dynasty. In any case, I would not make a strong statement on this because of the low quality of the image and also of the uncertainty of its origin. But I think there is another painting that might offer us some hints about the use of powdered tea in the Ming Dynasty. So this is another painting, also a very famous painting by Tang Yin that is now conserved at the National Palace Museum in Taipei. The title of the painting is The Tea Party at the Huishan Monastery in Wuxi, and it is dated 1518. In the detail of the painting that we can see, we see a white pot on the stove, probably made of ceramic or maybe metal, might be silver or pewter. Observe that the top of this cup is very similar to the teapot that Mr. Ip just showed us. Behind the stove, there is a bronze urn with a ladle inside that most probably was for water. And then we have here, and then we have a big pitcher here made of greenish Celadon ceramic with a typical crackle pattern of Celadon. Then we see some cups here made of the same material upside down on a wooden stand, and then we see a cup here, typical Song style cup, or the early Ming Song cup with the wooden stand and the cup on the top. What is interesting in this picture that, of course, this picture might very well be a teapot. That means a pot where tea leaves are steeped inside. But please observe the object on this side of the painting. Here we can see 3 spoons with a very long handle, and then an object that to me resembles very much a whisk used in the Song Dynasty for preparing. Here's the whiskers. Of course, it might be a brush from or a broom from some other, so for something else. But in any case, we do have also textual proofs of the use of powdered green tea in the middle of the Ming Dynasty. The manual on tea, published in 1541 by Suzhou scholar printer Gu Yuanqing, is based on another text compiled a few years earlier by another Suzhou scholar called Qian Chuannian. So this essay is composed mainly of material from early texts, commented and integrated with new elements. In this text, we find description of different ways to make scented tea, similar to that proposed by Zhu Quan. But also we have also the description of 2 different ways of preparing the beverage. We have 2 sections. The first is boiled tea, that deals mainly with the boiling of water for preparing tea. And then we have the second one, it is the 3 essentials of pointing tea, that deals quite clearly with the preparation of whisked tea. In the list of 16 tools contained in a basket described in one of the 8 wood block tables attached to this text, we also find the whisk for stirring power mentioned. This list, in any case, mentions another special tool, that is a bamboo colander for washing tea leaves. Clearly, washing tea leaves, that means soaking tea leaves, is clearly inconsistent with the preparation of whisked tea. That means putting dry tea leaves in the grinder, in the mill, and then grind them in fine powder. The washing process is also described in this part of the text. So it is most probably that even if it is not consistent in the choice of material that are taken from early texts, these 2 parts indeed describe 2 different ways of preparing tea in use in the middle of 16th century. That means that in that period we have both powdered tea and both wool leaf tea. In this text, there is we find reference to another important aspect of tea consumption in the late Ming Dynasty, which was somehow transversal to different ways for preparing the beverage, that is, the addition of fruit and other stuff into the teacup. The topic is dealt in the section regarding pointing tea, where the author explains that fruit and flowers can spoil the taste of tea, and one should not add any of them in order to appreciate its absolute pureness. In any case, if one really had to put something inside tea, he lists 15 different kinds of dried fruits, kernels, vegetables that can be mixed with tea. As you can see, the list is quite far beyond the range of stuff that most of people today might consider suitable as an additive for tea. According to another text written by a Hanzhou author called Yan Yiheng in 1554, that is 14 years after Gu Yuanqing manual, we read that the custom of putting fruit in the teacup with tea was a recent habit. The text warns not to do it because it can spoil the genuine taste of pure tea. It also explains that when putting tea, it is necessary to use a spoon. So in this text we find an explanation of the portrait of the teaspoons we found in Wen Jianming painting. The blame for the adding of fruit into tea is recurrent in all the essays on tea written in the late Ming. And if one had to rely solely on tea literature, would come to the conclusion that in the late Ming, people stopped adding fruit and other stuff in the tea. Actually, serving tea with dry fruit inside was the most common way of entertaining a guest in the last century of the Ming, against which I think Jiangnan scholars and tea connoisseurs were opposing their distinctive practice. A confirmation of this can be found in the confirmation of the fact that the late Ming people were putting fruit inside the teacup comes from an early text, and also because I have many references in fiction literature from the beginning of the Qing Dynasty. We find also in the ruling Whisk, we find description of fruit put inside the teacup. In any case, in the records of the conversation between Zhu Ziyu, Zhu was a Chinese scholar and Ming loyalist that took refuge in Japan in 1645 after the foundation of the Qing Dynasty. So when he was in Japan, he had many conversations with the Japanese Confucian scholar Hitomi Chikudo. Hitomi had several meetings or so-called brush discussions, since none of them could speak the language of the other. So they were just talking, writing literary Chinese on paper, actually. And he also had a quite intense correspondence with Zhu, to which he asked many things about Chinese Confucianism and about many aspects of Chinese material culture. So in one case, answering the question about the use of boiled and whisked tea in China, Zhu answered that today these two methods are gone, and it is prepared only by steeping. When a guest arrives, he is always first served tea in a ceramic bowl, with 2 or 3 walnuts, hazelnut, melon seeds, or ginkgo nuts immersed into it. A silver spoon is put on the bowl is placed on the saucer, and it is offered to the guest. So we can see that in the first half of the 17th century, tea with fruit was a sort of regular formal treat for a guest, and tea was normally prepared by steeping. In this text, and in some other Ming essays dedicated to tea, the steeping process is clearly indicated with the term pao. Here is pao, okay, which means infuse, steep. In many other cases, Ming authors use words such as peng cha or jian cha, inherited from Tang and Song tea literature, that literally means boiling or cooking tea. These words in Ming literature are generally considered as evocative, old-fashioned terms for the preparation of tea, with no actual reference to boiling tea, but to the boiling of the water for preparing tea. Nevertheless, we have some possible pictorial representation of boiling tea leaves and a quite unequivocal textual evidence of this practice in the 16th century. In this painting from the beginning of the 16th century by Tang Ying, entitled Serving Tea, conserved at the Beijing Palace Museum, we can see a scholar sitting at a desk with a big pot and a cup on his right. The pot reminds us very much the big, large Yixing pot we've seen before. On the left, in the separate room, there is a servant who is intent to control the stove. On the stove, there is no pot, but there is another pot that is identical to the one on the desk. On beside of the stove on the table with cups. So a possible explanation for me is that the pot on the desk was first heated on the stove. And if we observe this, we find a similar setting. In this painting, this is by Wuxi painter Wang Wen. It is entitled Boiling Tea, 煮茶图, and it is dated 1558. It is conserved at the National Palace Museum of Taipei. And we can see a host in front of a bamboo tea stove concentrated on the range of the charcoal. The most interesting feature of this painting is that the shape and the size of the pot on the stove are extraordinarily similar to those of the Ising pot we found in the previous slide. So a possible interpretation is that this kind of instrument was actually used for simmering tea. In any case, we have confirmation of this practice in a text written in by a Hangzhou scholar called Chen Shi, native of Hangzhou, who obtained the provincial degree in 1552 and after then served as a prefect in Yunnan province. He wrote his text, it is called Cha Kao, while he was serving in Yunnan. And this is interesting because in the same way that the Ming loyalists in Japan used a very detailed way to explain how tea was prepared in China, also this author is very detailed in explaining how tea was prepared in different parts of Jiangnan area, maybe because he first circulated his own work among scholars in Yunnan. So in Chakao we find this statement regarding the method of preparing tea. Only in Suzhou and Wu district did know how to do it. They put fine tea into a ceramic pitcher and boil it on the fire. And here the syntax is quite unequivocal, I say. They control the boil, stopping it when numerous bubbles similar to crab eyes appears. So again we have crab eye from the description given by Lu Yu, who was talking about fish eyes. In any case, crab eye was another version, but in any case we can see that we can affirm that according to this text, in Suzhou in the middle of 16th century there were people boiling tea. Then he also add this sentence and say that whenever I go to a Buddhist monastery, there is a knowledgeable monk who prepares tea in the same way they do it in Wu district. He puts a ceramic pot and 2 small bowls on the table and entertains the guest without using any fluid. It's worth remembering that from the middle of the Ming Dynasty, Suzhou emerged as the center of culture and exerted a dominant influence in the literary field as well in that of fashion and luxury consumption. So everything made in Suzhou was desirable in that period. Everything was in the fashion of Suzhou was desirable. So using a pot for making tea, whether simmering or steeping it, was the normal way to prepare tea in Suzhou and became the model for all tea connoisseurs in the country. As Winji just told us, also the Yixing clay pot were first adopted and promoted by scholars of Suzhou like Chen Jiru and from those from in the surrounding area, and then eventually became the most sought after vessel for steeping tea, also in the southern and northern provinces. This author is very interesting because he's from Hangzhou, and he and other 2 authors from Hangzhou, that was a very important center in the Jiangnan area, describe a different way of preparing tea common in that city, which consists in steeping a pinch of tea leaves in a cup, pouring water on them, and then drinking the liquor directly from the cup. This method actually can be seen as a kind of sort of evolution of the Sung style preparation of powdered tea. In any case, we have tea which is prepared and drunk from a cup. This method, we know that is very simple, is nowadays very common in many parts of China, in particular in the western and northern regions, where tea leaves are normally served in special cups with the lid and saucer called gaiwan, or cup with the lid. On the left we see a painting by Qing painter Leng Mei, and on the right we see two gaiwans in two tea houses in Chengdu in Sichuan province. In any case, we know that all Ming tea connoisseurs, Ming tea specialists, and all the texts written in that period promote the preparation of tea by steeping the leaves in a teapot. That was a favorite method used by scholars and tea connoisseurs. In this painting by Chen Hongshou, a Zhejiang painter active in the first half of 17th century, we see a kettle on the stove, and beside there is a white teapot beside it, and two scholars each holding a cup. This is clearly steeped tea, since we have both kettle and teapot. As you can see, the teapot and the teacups in this painting, and also in those of the previous slides, look all very large. We can imagine, of course, that this is due to a kind of Victorian expedient used to give more emphasis to these material elements. But we have both material, let's say archaeological, and textual proof that confirm that in the Ming, at least in the 16th century, teapots were actually very large. So I would like to conclude this overview of the preparation of tea with a text from the late 16th century, which gives detailed indication of the size of the tool and also on the way to use them to steep tea. The treatise on tea, Cha Shu, by Hangzhou scholar Xu Ceshu, states that the teapot should be small. It should not be too big. If it is small, the fragrance remains concentrated. If it is big, it will be easily get dispersed. One containing half a sheng is one of the preparate size. If it is for personal use, the smaller the better. For a half sheng of water, measure 5 fang of tea. In another part of the text, we find that a pot was actually intended for 2 or a maximum of 4 people. Coincidentally, the volume of a Ming sheng corresponded to a metric system liter. So half a sheng was half a liter, and 5 fan in the Ming Dynasty at least. In the 5 fan corresponded to less than 2 grams of tea. So what is interesting here is the small amount of tea leaves and the fact that for this author, half a liter was, a teapot of half a liter was considered already a small teapot. About the preparation, which he calls Tang Dynasty, he says, first hold the tea leaves in your hand. When the water is ready, cast them in the pot and immediately pour the hot water on the tea. Place the lid on the pot and wait for the time of 3 breaths. Then pour out all the tea into a large bowl and pour it again into the pot. This is to steer the fragrance and to prevent the color from stagnating. Waiting for the time for other 3 breaths in order to calm its levity. Then pour it out and serve it to the guests. In the text also we find that a teapot can serve only 2 rounds. The word for rounds is xun. The first round is fresh and delicious, the second is sweet and mellow, the third is no more desirable. In the text, he compares the taste of the 3 serves of tea with the female beauty, saying that it is like beautiful woman in different age. The same text then goes on saying that for these reasons it is desirable that the pot is small. If it is small, it will finish serving 2 rounds. Some scholars interpreted the term xun as infusion, as steeping. This is the term xun, sorry. Okay. Moving from the standpoint that these texts describe a sort of kung fu style or sencha style, consecutive multiple infusions. Considering the meaning of the character xun, which actually indicates the movement with which liquid is poured in a set of cups, also for wine, for example, and the lack of any reference to a possible refill of the pot, considering also the size of the pot and the small amount of tea leaves put in the pot, I think that this is not the description of a consecutive multiple infusion, but of a single continuous infusion, which today is still practices with big teapots. Here we see a painting of a tea, portraying a tea house in the Republican period, and here on the right we have tea served today at the famous Yew Garden Tea House in Shanghai. So if you go to the ground floor, tea is still served in this way. So as you can see, that the cup is very small, and you cannot empty the whole teapot pouring 1 cup of tea. So in this case, we have a big pot which, after serving the first round, the tea continues to soak in the water, and when you pour the second round, the liqueur is more concentrated and tasty, of course, leaving the tea leaves in the pot without adding any water. The taste becomes, of course, bitter and no more inviting. That is what Xu Zhishu in his text was describing in 1597. So as a conclusion, from textual and visual material we can have a vision of what there was tea in the Ming Dynasty, and we see that the tea was prepared in different ways. Sung style whisk powdered tea was still in use in the first half of 16th century, but was then completely replaced by the use of wu leaf tea. In Suzhou, tea connoisseurs used to prepare the beverage both boiling or steeping tea leaves in big pots, and later preferred to steep it in small Yixing teapots. In Hangzhou, people steep tea directly in a tea bowl. These 2 methods are still commonly used today for the preparation of green tea. In Ming tea literature, in any case, we don't find any reference to the method of Kungfu-cha. All tea essays in that period were written by Jiangnan scholars, which is a part still far from Fujian and Guangdong. In any case, we also know that in the Ming Dynasty, tea was also drunk differently from now, because normally people used to put fruit and flour in the cup that now we don't know. So we can say that in the Ming period there were already the seeds and maybe also some developed sprouts of the form of tea consumption we have today, but still we can notice some important differences.